Hi, I'm Greg Farrar. It's May 25th, and this is my COVID-19 Trends live stream. I will do an analysis of the countries of the world, followed by the states of California, states of the United States, followed by the counties of California. I just got a notification about my internet being wonky. Hopefully this is broadcasting. Drop something in the chat if you can hear me. Okay. I'll just continue. So I'm gonna take just a moment to get a very high level view at all three levels: countries, states, and counties, because the graphs look similar. This is a graph that I don't spend much time on, the total cases, but notice there's one blue line that's way above everyone else. That's the United States, way above everyone else in the world in total cases. And then at the state level, there's one blue line that's way above everyone else, or if we want to combine the blue and red, New York, New Jersey together, since they're kind of a cluster, a single cluster, way above everyone else. And then finally at the county level, Los Angeles, the one blue line, way above everyone else. In a certain sense, the world goes as the United States goes. The United States goes as New York and New Jersey go, and the state of California goes as Los Angeles goes. Any major swings in any of these are disproportionately affecting the way that the whole region they're in goes in terms of total numbers. The other thing I'll note is this is what it looks like when things are going well on this graph. You see a bunch of dots that are below, the recent dots are all below the line. That's because New York is decelerating in cases so quickly that the line can't keep up. The line hasn't quite yet believed that it's almost horizontal and is still is lagging the trend. So this is what we like to see, dots below the line. The recent dots are below the line, and that's what New Jersey is doing as well. At the country level, we see just barely that, but really not. The dots are pretty much on the line. The United States is not decelerating rapidly, but the dots are a little bit below. This most recent couple dots, you can kind of see the line is on the top part of the dot. So the United States is doing okay, but doesn't have this great look of New York, New Jersey. And then finally, at the county level, Los Angeles is doing exactly what we don't like to see, which is to say it's outstripping its lines. It is accelerating, and this is what makes the state of California look. This is the biggest factor on how the state of California looks as a whole in the state's analysis. Is if Los Angeles, which is the biggest component, is outgrowing its line, that's not good for California as a whole. All right. That's just a little, almost a diversion. Let's go back to, let's look at per capita countries. I'm already here, I guess. So per capita, worth noting, I'm not sure who was 25th before, but now we've got a new one, the UAE. The top one, as always, is Qatar. Far more serious problem there than anywhere else in the world. It's the smallest country at 2 to 3 million, so it's 100th the size of the United States, and so in terms of total cases, it's nowhere near the United States. But I think this is actually, well, in lives lost, this is not as relevant, but in terms of how well countries are doing relative to each other, this is the graph to look at. And Qatar is doing much worse than the other countries. Behind it, Chile and Peru are part of that Central South America cluster. You notice Brazil isn't here. Brazil is, in this list to the right, the second, which means that in total new daily cases, Brazil is doing quite badly. Let's look. If we're not correcting for population, Brazil is showing this very problematic trend where it's starting to pass the United States in total cases. The United States, as we saw, is very slightly declining, very slowly declining. This is almost 2 months here that we're watching, or at least 6 weeks we're watching this decline, but it has declined very slowly from 30,000 a day down to 20,000 a day. So with Brazil still heating up, A couple of good data points, but generally still heating up. It seems very likely that Brazil will become the worst in the world in new daily cases. Total. But again, when you look at it here, it's not really a player. Brazil is not a major player. Brazil per capita, Brazil is the same size as the United States, roughly, in people. And per capita, these other countries have a much worse case of it. I'm flashing the United States line right now. It's at 66 per million new cases daily. Contrast that with 700 per million for Qatar. Qatar has it much worse than the United States right now. And similarly, Brazil, if you flash that line, it certainly isn't looking great, but we have to kind of zoom in before we even see it. Qatar, Chile, Peru, all smaller countries, but with a worse problem per capita. We will zoom in, though, past that and take a look. Belarus is starting to flatten out and look a little better. Singapore, which was problematic for a while there. Where is Singapore? I'm going to zoom in on that to see what it is that has pulling it down. There are some data points here that are clearly inaccurate, but broadly, most of these points are right. Singapore, very low on the graph, on the list, not that many cases, but starting to look better. We often see that the very bottom of the list has the most extreme growth, and that's the UAE is where it is because it's seen pretty significant growth, and it's therefore burst into the top 25 after being completely invisible to us for quite a while there. 100 cases roughly per million. Again, nothing like Qatar, which is just way above everyone else. But still, 100 is problematic. Any is problematic, but 100 I might say is starting to be the cutoff where we start to say this is really above the very small numbers. It's large enough that it's in the running to be a major player. For instance, Belarus, Singapore, and now the UAE. Very small, but per capita is starting to grow. I have a question. I do love questions. Brazil is going to show a lower number of confirmed cases compared to what they really have due to testing poorer areas. Can we look at their per capita testing? Okay, so going down to Brazil, we do have the ability to look at per capita testing, at least to some degree. We have the percent tested, and percent tested daily is really a kind of a problematic graph. But let's look at this graph is a little more reliable. The testing data is challenging. Let's see if we've even got it for Brazil. Yeah, sadly not. Brazil, a couple times we've gotten a report of testing from Brazil. 0.06% of the population tested, but that's minuscule, and we just haven't got more data. So I don't know. Brazil may be way worse than we think. We just don't know. But even if it is, even if their numbers are being pulled down by, I assume you're expecting lower testing in the poorer areas. If their numbers are being pulled down, then Brazil's got it way worse than we thought. But Brazil's already got it as bad as anyone. They're as bad as the United States right now. Per capita, Brazil has passed the United States. I didn't remember that. Is that right? I guess it's in total daily cases that they haven't passed, and I keep expecting that to happen. Brazil must be a little bit smaller than the United States, but not a whole lot. I think they're in the 200,000 to 300,000 range as well, like the United States. But so these graphs aren't dramatically different. But once we adjust by population, per capita, Brazil has passed the United States. And more importantly, it's rising, whereas the United States is falling. And let's go to the rope chart to say that the other thing I always like to see is how are these doing, what direction are they trending? In the case of the United States, it's holding steady or maybe just barely below zero, just barely shrinking, but pretty much the United States is holding steady. By the way, we've seen this for a long time. You can see this, United States is flatline here, right at zero. It's not bad, it's not good, the epidemic is shrinking, it's not growing, but we see that it is dramatically shrinking in places like New York and New Jersey. And what's happening is we're seeing geographic waves. So first there was New York and New Jersey. They got better, but just as they got better, we started seeing Louisiana and Michigan and Illinois and others, California coming online, and they sort of cancel each other out. And now Louisiana and Michigan and Illinois are getting better, I think. We'll see that in the state section. California, not so much. But as they get better, then a whole bunch of smaller places are coming online. And so I think we're going to run out of states eventually. And we're going to run out of states to have waves. And unless there are major second waves, which we haven't seen, I won't see nowhere. There have been small second waves in a few cases, and maybe even significant ones in a very few cases. But mostly we see someone peaks, it drops away, and if there is a second wave, it's small. I think that we're going to see this United States line, we're going to see it drop because we're going to run out of states to get infected. It's gradually working its way through all 50 plus the territories, and once it's done, I don't think we're going to see a major second wave. Well, at least I haven't seen evidence that the second waves are as big as the first waves, but we'll see. Anyway, we have this nice comparison of Brazil and the United States. In total cases, the United States leads, but is clearly dropping, 30,000 down to 20,000. Brazil is clearly rising, and sharply. Per capita, Brazil has long since passed the United States, though again, neither of them hold a candle to any of these smaller places. Qatar, Chile, Peru, there's just this cluster down here, and Brazil and the United States are in that cluster and don't even register because they're both under 100, I think, 100 per million of new daily cases. They're both under 100. Brazil seems likely to crack that 100 line, which I would say is an indicator of a really serious problem. But don't let the screaming headlines about Brazil blind you to the fact that relative to certain other countries, it is actually doing quite a bit better. And recall, let's see, if we look at, for instance, the state of New York, per capita, per day, it peaked in the 500 range. So Brazil is down at 100 still. It still hasn't crossed 100. So yes, Brazil has the biggest problem in the world, but that just means the world doesn't have a very big problem. That no one can outdo. That Brazil, that's barely even hitting 100, is a good sign for the world. New York and Italy and Spain and all sorts of other places have been 5 times worse, or in Qatar, but that's pretty small. But even big places like Italy, Spain, and New York have been way worse than Brazil is right now. And when you look at how much Brazil is growing, well, actually, I thought it was going to show it wasn't growing much, but actually Brazil's growth rate is still pretty bad. We have seen 20% growth rate. This is only a 5%, so we've seen a lot worse. But Brazil has just been steadily growing, and its growth rate does not seem to be shrinking at this point. So yes, Brazil has it bad. Yes, another month will put it, I'd have to do the calculation. How long does it take to quintuple your cases when you're growing 5% a day? It's a long time, actually. And it would have to do that in order to even be in the running as a major problem. So I think the news just doesn't have much to talk about right now, which is good. There are none of these super white hot spots that we had. All of them have recovered. Europe. Now, if we do look at, let's look not at the rope chart yet, but let's look at some of. So ignoring for the moment Qatar, and let's not ignore Chile because that's substantial, and Peru. Yeah, so just ignoring Qatar. Central South America is certainly has a major problem. And Chile, population, I'll look it up, population 18 million, sort of New Yorkish. Chile is halfway to being a really, really hot spot, and it's rising. So Chile could become the new hot spot. Peru at 140, also above that 100 line. Everyone else is kind of okay, even Brazil, and certainly the United States as a whole. United States as a whole is at 66. So when we see 600, United States is 10% of what the worst hotspots have been. So we do see a rising problem in Central South America, but everyone pretty much is under that 100, with those few exceptions. Brazil probably will crack 100. UAE is almost certainly going to crack 100, but again, 100, it's a fifth of the peak we got to in other places. Everyone else is fine. And these are certainly problem spots. UAE, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, all rising according to this. But let's look at the rope chart and see what they say. What the rope chart consistently says, and the rope chart doesn't look that good worldwide. We've seen it look better. We've seen any country that's above this zero line here, the thicker white line with a zero at the left side of the graph, is growing. And so we see a lot of countries growing. How many? About, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 11. Actually, that's not as bad as I thought. Most countries are still shrinking. They're just sort of compressed here into this 5% range, whereas the growing countries, some of them are growing quite a bit more, and it makes it look like there's more bulk above the line. But nobody has a sharp upward trajectory except for Ecuador, which has been whacked for many days now, not necessarily in a pandemic sort of way, but in a data sort of way. There was a really wild data point from Ecuador that's never been corrected, and so we see this crazy swing. Ecuador is now starting to show, I think, that it's around zero growth. It's starting to level out and look reasonable again. So we don't know about Ecuador, but nothing else is trending upwards sharply, and this is sort of the second level of upwards trending. There's upwards trending in the sense of Brazil, which is getting more and more new cases every day. That's a problematic upward trend. That just, all of these above the zero line have that kind of upward trend. They're getting more and more cases every day. But then there's the second level upwards trend that says the growth rate is rising. It's 7% now, maybe Chile would be 8%, or tomorrow 9% and 10%. If it were sharply angled upwards, that would be the second level rise. We don't see any of that, maybe just barely the slightest in Bangladesh here, but nobody's trending upwards. So we'd love to see all these countries below zero. We're not seeing that. We're just seeing this horizontalness throughout, which says those that are rising are continuing to rise, but they're not accelerating. Those that are falling are continue to fall, but are not accelerating. There is one acceleration, one major one, just one, Russia. Only Russia is showing a sharp deceleration. So Russia, which that was last week's news, was Russia. By the way, let's see where Russia actually peaked. Because again, the news wants to talk about someone. They're going to find someone to talk about. But where did Russia actually peak? This is daily cases. I want daily cases per million. Okay, Russia. Looking at just Russia, they peaked at 80. And again, 80 is small. 80 is small. 500 is bad. 100 is starting to seem, relative to other portions of the world that have gone through epidemics, is starting to seem bad. But 80 means Russia never got bad, and you might not know it from the news. Never got bad, and you can really see on this graph it is sharply downward, or significantly downward here, which gives us this sharp downward trend on the rope chart. So Russia's looking good and never got bad per capita. Turkey, slightly down, but mostly we see a lot of horizontal. And I guess this is a pretty good one too. Peru is showing the first signs of pulling out of Central South America pulling out of its tailspin. Let's try looking at all of Central South America. I'll grab a few of them. I hope I can get all of them. Yeah, Ecuador I'm just going to ignore because it's so messed up. Data-wise, not in terms of cases. So Central South America still obviously showing a growth trend. They're all above zero, all the ones that are in the top 25. I might have missed one, but none of them are accelerating. The worst is Chile, which has maybe just the very slightest trend towards accelerating. The rest are tilted slightly or significantly downward. Peru certainly has the best angle here, looks to turn the corner towards negative growth in a matter of days, a day or two. Peru will probably be shrinking in new cases. So our worst cluster in the world is Central South America, and as a whole, that cluster is not getting worse. It's still the worst, and it's still kind of bad, but it again, in per capita, well, Brazil isn't so bad per capita. Let's take a look at Central South America, specifically per capita. Peru, I'm gonna have to zoom out. So Peru is much worse than Brazil. Chile, I don't think Ecuador. Actually, I'm gonna try to pull in Ecuador, even with its crazy data point, just to show where it lives. That's most or all of what's of the top 25 Central South America. So Chile is a problem. 100 is bad. I mean, yeah, 100 is bad, I'll say, and 200 is very bad. It's not as bad as we've seen. We've seen 500, we've 600, 700, but it's trending upwards, shooting past 200. From this graph, it could easily reach 500 before it peaks. The rest of them probably not. The way you can see the green line of Peru starting to flatten off. You can see that Brazil here, you can tell better from the rope chart. Yeah, it could be. If these trends continue indefinitely, yes, all three of these lines will eventually hit 500. But I've seen a lot of these graphs now over the past couple months. It's not going to happen. These two, I say, are not going to hit 500. Maybe Chile. We'll see. Which is interesting because Brazil is this poster child for how not to have an epidemic in the news right now, but I think they're doing okay. They're doing okay. They've got a 5% growth rate, but it's not accelerating. It's slightly downward. I think Brazil is never going to be one of those 500 hills that we've seen in several other parts of the world. Maybe Chile. Okay. Cases world. Well, let's just take a look. The rope chart for the world, actually, I think some of our older data points have disappeared off the far end of this graph, and so the scale on this graph is much tighter than we've seen before. So don't get alarmed by what appears to be a rapid rising in the growth rate worldwide. The world growth rate is rising, and that is alarming in itself, but it's rising only 1% a day, which is what we've been seeing for a while. So the world has not recovered. We've got each of these points is 7 days, an average of 7 days. We have weeks now where we've never seen a shrinkage over a 7-day period in the world, and that we're not done until we start seeing this again, which we did for a while. The world was shrinking, and then, like the United States, we started to see, oh, here comes Central South America online. Oh, Brazil, big country, has a relatively bad problem. Not as bad as some, but bad enough that that as the world's epicenters, the major epicenters, the real problems that we had a month ago, as those have gone away, maybe the Irans, this significant new possible upcoming centers, maybe even the Indias. Or let's look at India for a minute, by the way, because India is still here. It's just so huge. I think it's here. Yeah, India, certainly here. India. Let's look at it. Yeah, India is problematic, a lot like Brazil, growing 5% a day. India could totally become, I mean, it already is a bit of a problem, but you look at, it has 5 per million. It's very, very small. Recall 500 is where the worst ones have peaked. So India could grow, but if growing 5%, how long does it take you to go from 5 per million to 500 per million? That's a long time. I don't think we're going to see that, but we might. India could run away with this thing. We could see a real problem there. But right now, it's not accelerating its growth. It's just steadily growing. It's hard to say. Maybe we don't know about all the cases there. But India certainly has the potential to be a 500 or a 5,000 or a 500,000 even on this graph. But it's at this point is staying way down there. But because of its large population, it still adds quite a number of cases. 5 per capita in India is a lot, or 5 per million. Okay. Testing, I'm going to skip over deaths because, as always, the deaths is a lot. The graphs look a lot like the total cases, except for the interesting fact that deaths just keep shrinking worldwide. Deaths keep shrinking even though cases are growing. And I've talked in some past ones about why that could be. It's a little mysterious. Percent population tested. We see Qatar, which not coincidentally, I think, is the very best in testing of the top 25. Qatar, again, recall, is the worst per capita in cases. Are they testing madly because they know they're the worst? Or are they the worst because they're testing madly and turning up a lot of cases? I hope it's the first. I really do. I hope that some time ago they said, oh, wow, we have a problem. 2 months ago, we're going to crank our testing to world-class levels. Probably not. They've been ahead for a long time. So I think this does point to the possibility that other countries that reach this level of testing might actually unearth underlying infection rates at the level we've seen in Qatar. We keep seeing things that say this country has 7% or 5% with antibodies or 15%. Nobody's 50%, but we have some pretty high numbers. And that could be the case in the United States too. And on the other hand, the United States, having tested 4% of its population, isn't radically behind Qatar and has turned up nothing like the per capita numbers of Qatar. So probably Qatar does have a whole lot more cases and is testing, and those two kind of interlock to give it the very highest per capita numbers. The numbers might not be quite so high if it wasn't testing madly, but they'd still probably be very high. Maybe they'd be 400 per million instead of 700 or something. Belgium's doing great. Russia, which again seems to be getting over it. I'm gonna make sure that's right, because now I suddenly forget. How is Russia doing? I think Russia is last week's news. And of course, we never know with some of the more authoritarian countries whether they're really reporting accurately. For all we know, China could have 1 billion cases, but I just tend to, trusting fellow that I am, I'm just going to say we're going to believe the numbers reported by the governments, and that's what we got to work with. And if we see something completely crazy from some other source in the same country, then we can say, all right, we're really not going to believe this number. Russia, though, we're going to look at Russia's growth rate. Yeah, that's right. Russia's doing great. Russia is last week's news. And just remember that, because Brazil is this week's news. You looked at the news a couple weeks ago, you would think Russia was going to the moon. Where did Russia peak? I mean, Russia does have a lot of cases. It's third in the world, but per capita, it peaked probably around here at 80. Again, nowhere near New York, nowhere near, I don't even remember where Italy and Spain peaked, but they may also have been. I don't think their peaks aren't even on this graph anymore, are they? Yeah, we can't see, but I think if you go back to their peaks might have been in the 500 range as well. But nothing like that from Russia. So we're chasing the far distant contenders at this point. No countries or states are doing any more like what we saw, nearly as badly as what we saw a month ago, which is good. What we now have is a whole lot of little countries that didn't get it at first, and now they've got it, and states as well, lesser states that didn't have it, and now they've got it, and they're drawing the numbers up by sheer weight of their population, but still, with the head start they had, I think they're going to whip this thing certainly before they get to anything like 500 per capita or per million. Population tested by day, you can see Russia is rising. Russia really seems to have a handle on this thing. Qatar rising, does not seem to have a handle on this thing. Where was Qatar in the rope chart? I think they're still growing, right? New daily cases, growth in daily cases. Qatar is certainly high, but are they doing better? Better. They're still growing, but only 2% a day, and their growth is visibly dropping. All right, that's a lot about the countries. I've already spent a half an hour on countries. Let's go to the states. Again, when I started this today, I said, oh, look how great the states are doing, or at least the two big ones. New York and New Jersey are they're doing well. You can tell by their dots trailing their trend line, but you can really tell if we go and look at the per capita cases. New York and New Jersey, which again were way up in the stratosphere in this 500, 600, 700 range we see for Qatar. We also saw for New York and New Jersey, or New Jersey to a lesser degree. Let's ignore that point. They were really bad per capita. 500 is really bad. Though I just want to step back and take the big picture. The Black Death, which swept through Europe, killed something like half the people. 500, like the deaths were, I should get my numbers straight, but I'll just say that this is nothing compared to other epidemics. This 500 per million, like 1% is 10,000 per million. And whatever the Black Death killed, it was on the order of half the population. Maybe it was 20, 30, 70% of the population. It was something like that. It was in the tens of percents of the population. So to get the really big perspective here, New York and New Jersey, this is just the cases. The deaths are immensely smaller than the cases, 2% max. We're seeing 0.5% sometimes. So just to take a moment of silence for the plague, which if we graphed it here, these would all be flatline. What we have here is not a serious epidemic, historically speaking. It's never, ever come anywhere near a serious epidemic, historically speaking. But since everything's relative, we say, oh, well, that's a lot of cases. 500 per million, that's a lot of cases. We'll keep in the mindset of coronavirus, but just not forgetting that coronavirus is mild compared to, there was something in Discover magazine had this nice graphic where they were plotting all the epidemics through time, and they made the virus bigger for each epidemic, and coronavirus was that, Black Death was this. It's not a big deal, actually, in terms of deaths. It's just that we have so much, in some sense, we have so much resource in our society that we can go to extraordinary lengths to try to save 10,000 lives, to try to save a millionth of the population. We're willing and able to go to extraordinary lengths to do that. We have the ability, we have the technology, and we have done that. And so the impact on our society it's still not the Black Death, but it's very significant because of the extreme measures we've taken to try to contain the number of deaths. But as a disease, this one is actually pretty, it's not bad. Black Death seems like it killed everyone infected practically. And this 0.5%, and it only infects, you look at these numbers, 500 per million per day. Anyway, enough about historical context. Coronavirus is a big problem in today's world. So New York, New Jersey peaked at 500, dropped away. If we look at the others, we do see, really, whereas in countries we were hard pressed to find anyone over 100 per million in new daily cases. There are a lot of states like that, and this is where we start to see, oh, that's why the United States isn't dropping. It's because we have a lot of states that are definitely in not the red zone of 500, but in the orange zone of 100 plus. All these states are over 100 per million. Illinois, Maryland, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Iowa, and Virginia. Notice California is not there. Those are the ones that are kind of in the orange alert or yellow alert or whatever you call it, where these are the ones that are, they're rising, or they're not necessarily rising, but their current daily cases per million are quite high. Very high, I would even say, but not extraordinarily high like the 500s we sometimes see. Now, Minnesota certainly has the worst angle of this, as it seems to be rising rapidly, already at 150. Looks like it's going to try to reach that 200. Maybe it will. It's probably the most likely right now of all the states to actually reach 200. Illinois and Maryland are certainly problematic. They're pushing 200. They may level off before they get there. And then there's Iowa and Virginia still rising a bit. These lines, New York and New Jersey, show us just how far those two states have come from being far and away the leaders with 300, 400, 500 cases per million per day. They've now dropped below that 100 line that I keep saying indicates not a big deal. 100 cases per million per day is not a big deal. We've seen a lot worse. doesn't mean we can all go outside and kiss our neighbors. Take it easy, try to get it under 10 per million per day. Yes, please. But in the meantime, just try to keep a sense of perspective that all these states down here, everyone I didn't mention, has got it good, under 100 per million per day. California is at about 50 per million per day. Colorado also doing quite well. It's maybe 60 per million per day. Louisiana was sort of last month's news. We keep talking about, Russia was 2 weeks ago news, and Brazil is today's news. None of these are first wave epidemics. These are all, it's almost like they skipped the first wave. Now they're having the second wave. The wave's not getting nearly as high as the first wave. In the case of Louisiana and Michigan, they were worse. They barely cracked that 100, which is enough to maybe get a little worried about, and now they're dropping down and seem to be doing better. Let's go to the rope chart. I don't know that I really showed, no, I did. As a whole, most countries were shrinking, but because of some big countries rising, the world as a whole was still rising just barely. The rope chart looks pretty good for the states. You can see the zero line here. Above zero, we don't have many states. Let's just list them. The ones that are actually shrinking now: Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, Tennessee, Wisconsin, California, and Indiana. Those are the states that are rising, that are growing in new cases. California is one of those, but just barely. The scale here has, the top of this is 3%. No one's growing at 5%. Certainly no one's growing at the 20% number we sometimes see. So these are all minor growth, but they are growth. And in many cases, the top cases, they're slightly accelerating in their growth. So Alabama has a problem. Alabama just popped to the bottom. By the way, notice who's missing. Rhode Island is missing. Rhode Island which was kind of the Qatar of the United States, the one that was really outlandishly high in per capita, though I think still probably in the 500 range, I forget now. It wasn't orders of magnitude bigger than everyone, but per capita Rhode Island was doing very poorly. Then they got better. No one ever talked about Rhode Island in the national media because it's tiny, but I tend to focus on per capita numbers, and Rhode Island, like Qatar, doesn't contribute much to the numbers, but it really had a problem. And Rhode Island got over its problem. It started getting over it maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and now it has shrunk. It is shrinking, shrunk so far that Alabama has taken its place. As we often see when a new state or country comes onto these graphs, it tends to be an outlier. It's more extreme than others, and it's always extreme to the upside. That's how it gets to be in the top 25. So Alabama is the worst, but still nothing serious to worry about here. A bare upslope, 3%. It's got to turn that around to get over it, but not too bad for Alabama. And everyone else is fine, including a lot of the worry spots, like Louisiana. Where's Louisiana? No, actually, Louisiana is growing. I forgot that I mentioned that. Louisiana is growing at less than 1%, or no, less than 2%, 1.5%, slightly upward. Louisiana isn't looking great. It was 2 months ago news, then it got better, now it's getting worse, but just barely. Georgia is hanging in there at 0, might be just barely turning back around. Texas is hanging in there at 0, might be shrinking slightly. Illinois, which has been a hot spot, has crossed 0 and is shrinking slightly. Michigan. Oh, Michigan, yeah, go Michigan. Michigan keeps being the best. Not extreme, again, 5%, but 5% drop every day. Michigan is getting over it. Iowa's doing great. It's fairly small in cases, but if it keeps that trajectory, it's going to be off the top 25 in no time. All right, testing by state. It's good to see New York's dots here are outpacing its trend line. We can see that actually in the daily testing even better. We can see that New York is really, it has a cluster of really high testing. there's this metric that says we should be testing 0.15% of our population every day. New York is blowing the doors off that metric. New York is testing 0.25% of the population every single day. That's impressive, especially when you're as big as New York. So go New York. New York is leading in daily testing now. Illinois, Connecticut also doing very well. Notice everyone is trending upward with the single odd exception of still Washington. Maybe Washington is so over this that it doesn't need to test, but I would think there'd still be some tendency for states with excess testing capacity to keep testing at least at their full rate, even if they don't accelerate it, to try to find new cases as they come in from other states. Not happening according to this data. I actually don't really believe the data for Washington. I think there's a data problem there because we can see every state is accelerating its testing. Probably Washington is too. Every state is above at least 0.5%. Most states are above 0.1%. The states that are meeting that standard of more than 0.1% tested per day: New York, Illinois, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Michigan, Georgia, Tennessee, and someone that I may not be able to quite grab here. There it is, Louisiana. So notice that those are kind of these states that 2 or 4 weeks ago we were saying, uh-oh, Louisiana problem. Uh-oh, Illinois has a problem. Uh-oh, Michigan has a problem. These states have ramped up their testing, I would say, spectacularly. This is a really pretty high bar to test 0.15% of the population. No one was doing anything like that a month ago. When the number that we sometimes return to is South Korea got over its epidemic with 0.4% of population total tested, maybe 0.8, but it was in 4 to 0.8 range, 0.4 total. These states, New York is testing that much every 2 days. It's testing every 2 days, and this is as a percentage, so it's already adjusted for population. New York is testing as many people per capita every 2 days as South Korea tested at the time that it peaked and had conquered its epidemic. So we're really cranking this testing up. If testing helps, then all these states are going in a good direction. The fact that we're still seeing a lot of states with growth, I believe, and I'll just say I speculate because I really don't know, but I speculate it's because there is quite a lot of undetected infection still. And the testing is finding more and more, and so we don't really quite know how bad it is. But if that's the case, then this is going to put a lid on it. And we haven't seen it happen yet, and I've been saying this for weeks. I really kind of expected the United States would trend downwards a month ago. I mean, it has been trending downward, but I expected the growth rate, I expected it to accelerate downward a month ago. And it hasn't quite done that. So there seems to be a tug of war here. Testing versus new infections maybe. And of course there's the whole shelter in place and are we going to wear masks and all that stuff, which is, we are reaching the end of our population's patience. And I can only say I'm glad that we got very impressive testing online before people ran out of willpower, because I get a lot of sense that people are running out of willpower, and we may actually at this point have so much infrastructure in place that we could handle people exploding into a wild orgy of non-social distancing and still not see the cases grow. We'll see. Don't have much time for the counties. I'll just go quickly. So again, this graph shows a little bit of a problematic trend in Los Angeles, but I'll probably be able to see it better in this graph. Is Los Angeles accelerating upwards? Well, it's certainly rising. The latest day seems to show a mini trend downward, but those don't necessarily last. The data points are all over the place. The rope chart for Los Angeles, maybe barely rising, 1% rising. Los Angeles is holding steady. Cases per million, we see, as with other places, once you adjust for population, the picture changes somewhat. Los Angeles is no longer the leader. Now it's Imperial. Imperial just keeps going. Imperial has managed to be the Qatar of California, holding steady at a significant 6% growth rate for a long, long time. While Los Angeles's growth rate drops, or at least is very small, Imperial's growth rate rises, and even though Los Angeles, let me look it up, population of Los Angeles County, where Los Angeles has 10 million, Imperial has 200,000. You wouldn't think they would compete, but per capita they certainly do, and they don't in the big graph. Imperial just doesn't have any cases compared to Los Angeles. If we actually look at the big graph, Los Angeles and Imperial, and Los Angeles. Imperial with 40 total cases every day, Los Angeles with 1,000. They're not in the same game, but I guess what I'm saying is I'd rather live in Los Angeles than Imperial right now. I'd rather live in Los Angeles than Imperial because my chances of getting infected are probably higher in Imperial because it has it has more cases per day. Kings County also looking a little problematic. Tulare, and most of the other is kind of noise. We're not seeing a big deal anywhere. Monterey is still showing up, I mentioned, because some of my peeps care about it. It's nearby. Actually, let's just look at the Bay Area real quick. San Francisco Bay Area, we've got Alameda, Santa Clara, San Francisco, San Mateo. Sometimes we throw San Joaquin in there. Did I forget one? I want to say I forgot one. I mean, Santa Cruz would be there, but I guess not. I think there are 6 we normally look at. Santa Cruz is so small that it doesn't even. And we hear news story cluster in Santa Cruz, and 20% growth in Santa Cruz. I didn't even look at that story, but I think if we looked at the story, it would mean we had 5 cases yesterday, and today we have 6. So 20% growth in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz typically has about 2 cases a day. It's just not a problematic place, even per capita. And I did do an analysis that brought it in just to see, and it's just not. Santa Cruz is fine. In the Bay Area. So in the Bay Area, we see, again, 100 is a problem. 100 per million is a problem per day. None of these have hit 40. None of them even seem like they're likely to hit 40. The only one that might is Alameda. The Bay Area is doing fine. If we look at the growth rates, we might see that they're growing a little bit. San Joaquin, San Mateo, Santa Clara, San Francisco. Let's take Los Angeles out of it. Yeah, I mean, the Bay Area, like a lot of California, is growing a little bit, mostly. We're seeing growth, but the growth has not brought it to a place where it's actually a big epidemic yet. It's still under, overall, looking at all the counties together, remembering 500 is a big number. What's the biggest county? 200. Imperial's pretty big. That's 200 is a number. 200 per million is a number that's exceptionally high for what we've seen of the coronavirus. Not exceptionally high in comparison to other epidemics of the past, but for coronavirus, that's very high. Los Angeles, barely over 100. So Los Angeles is problematic even from a per capita standpoint. Kings also, maybe Tulare, though it seems to be heading downward. The rest of these are just fairly small per capita. Not a big deal. By all means, we want to smush this thing down, but the testing is online and the cases have never gotten large anywhere in California. Never really large. Nothing like New York. And we're looking at counties here, so you would expect the very worst county in California to be a lot worse than California as a whole, whereas in New York we're looking at the thing as a whole, so there must have been some really bad counties in New York, not so California. Let's look at testing, population. Testing per county is a little bit, we don't have the data for all the counties, but of the ones we do have, San Francisco is doing very well, Los Angeles doing very well. I think that testing daily is even more problematic to look at. Oh, I will look at our 2 metrics. We have the data. What I didn't look at is the positive at the state level, the percent positive. There is this other metric that I'm quite interested in, which is this idea that when you have less than 10% positive, that your state is doing very well. when you do 1,000 tests and only 100 come back positive, you're doing very well, or maybe 80, depending who you ask. But which of the states have done better than that number? The states that are doing well according to that metrics are Ohio, Arizona, and Georgia. And now if we switch over to the 8% metric, those three are sort of on the borderline. But the ones that are really doing well, even by the more stringent California metric, are Wisconsin, North Carolina, Texas, Washington State, Florida, California, and Tennessee. So California is doing very well by that metrics, by its own metric, it's doing very well. Where is Colorado in here? Colorado is doing 16%, not good enough, but getting better. All the states are getting better. Texas is doing very well by that metric. Louisiana, heading there, 11%, doing better. All right, I know that I lose my non-California listeners when I switch to the California section, so I'm not going to spend much more time on states. But I will say that percent tested per day, to whatever degree this data is accurate, and it's missing stuff. It's not super great what we've got here, but the counties that are meeting, according to this data set, that are meeting the requirement, the statewide requirement to open up, are Los Angeles, San Francisco, Sonoma, and Imperial. We've had some good days in Santa Clara, so maybe that one's headed there. Solano, Santa Barbara, Ventura. We've had some days where they've tested more than that 0.15%. But there are a lot of counties that are below it, a lot of counties that are not testing enough to meet the state's requirement for opening up. Ones that are very close: San Luis Obispo, trending there, San Diego, Kings, and maybe, I can't seem to grab that, maybe Santa Barbara. So there are a lot of counties that still have a long way to go in terms of testing before they can meet that requirement. All right, that's the news. It's mixed, as often. To go back to my favorite one, on the California level, the rope chart, there are a lot of counties growing, and there aren't many counties shrinking. Tulare is probably the best, I guess. I hope that's because the testing is picking up. But there are a lot of counties above that zero line that are still seeing more and more daily new cases. That said, the actual number of cases right now is low compared to other hotspots. And so they'd have to be here for a long time. We're talking weeks, maybe even months at this. I mean, if Marin keeps going at this 12% rate, it's going to be all hell's out for noon in Marin in a matter of just a few weeks. But most of these are in the 5% range. If they keep staying at that high, relatively, that positive growth rate, we will eventually see all of these becoming serious problems. My guess, speculation, is we're going to see all of these peak and drop away and drop below zero. At least the ones that are here now I think we're going to see them drop below zero in a matter of weeks as testing catches up to them. But that's just speculation. It's totally possible that there is a statewide epidemic of growth spanning many counties with many new infections coming online. We'll just have to keep watching that. At the state level, states are looking much better. There aren't that many states growing. There are more that are shrinking. And at the country level, it's about 50-50. Country level, as we saw, though it looks like there's more above the line than below, there are actually few countries above the line than below. So worldwide, the cases seem to be shrinking. There's no real runaway growth, and we seem to be getting over this, or trending towards getting over this at the world level. But we certainly haven't reached that place where obviously all the countries and states and cities are below that zero line and are shrinking. What we are seeing, though, is that the epidemics we are seeing now are smaller than the epidemics we saw a couple months ago. So that's probably good news. That's the news for today. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for watching.